Hello, good morning, and I am in the house because, in honour of our compatriots out in Japan who are going to be attempting to get into the next part of the World Cup, it's a typhoon out there. It's not particularly a typhoon in here, but the coffee is better. So I have sat with my coffee this morning rather than meander round trying to find somewhere in order to broadcast. So this week, however, has been an interesting one for me to muse upon the aspect of two young people that we have in care. Increasingly, what we've been finding is there are a number of children who are coming from England up to Scotland in order to be put in accommodation, and we have a number of young people now with us. And it's often suggested that this is quite a difficult one to deal with, particularly in education, because there is a set-up in England which does not transfer easily into Scotland. And many English authorities can't understand why. And it's not always because of the arrogance of the English that they think that their process is something that should be replicated through the rest of the United Kingdom. Sometimes it's just because they didn't know that. And when you point out, they're very, very respectful of children being in another country. But it causes difficulty. So this week I've been talking to a principal educational psychologist in a local authority with regards to two young people and trying to get them some sort of education provision. But the one this week that has really thrown me a little is actually a Scottish child from one local authority and another local authority who has had a difficult past and is exhibiting behaviours because of that difficult past. And working with the school, and I use that term quite loosely, has been a challenge. Not just because education does have a degree of arrogance over its approach to children and young people insofar as it may feel it is the best option, and often it is. And the statistics would bear out the fact that the majority of children who achieve because they have some form of schooling behind them. But sometimes they don't because school's the wrong place for them to be. So the difficulties this week with this particular young person has been about an organisation sitting saying we can't do X, we can't do X, we can't do X. Well, of course they're entitled to X. Well, why can't they do X? Why can't they take that step? Well, actually, I understand why. And sometimes what happens is that we become quite caught up in wanting to catch out the other side because they've not been great. And it doesn't help the children and young people in our care. So we have to take a little step back and be a little more mature about it. And hopefully that's happened because it looks as though we may, where we are, be in charge of some of that child's education, perhaps more of that child's education than the school will be, in order to get a positive result, which is right for that child. So I've been musing a lot on that over the week because it's a difficult conundrum to get your way through, and I'll never be on countdown, but hopefully what I'll be able to do is to find the right thing for that particular child. It's also the morning I referenced Japan earlier on. We get thumped 4-0 by Russia in football, having beaten them 61-0, I believe, in the Rugby World Cup. And I don't think there's many of us looking forward to the next 90-minute melee of Scottishness. So we're just going to have to put up with 80 minutes of what might be complete blissful agony as we take on Japan in the Rugby World Cup, hoping to beat them and progress through, be the first team to beat the home nation to go through. And we have to do apparently by 7 clear points, which would allow us to progress. I think it was the quarter final, I believe, 4 years ago. 4 years ago that we got put out against Australia, and we would have been up against Argentina in the semi-final and hopefully progress to the first ever World Cup final. This year, it does not look so good. Now, I remember many, many years ago, and I think it was before the last World Cup, the Scottish Rugby Union had put in their plan that Scotland were going to be world champions, and everybody ridiculed them until that quarter final against Australia. And that call by the official, the referee, which denied us progressing at the semi-final, which could have been progress into the final, which might well have been proof that the Scottish Rugby Union weren't run by a complete complete load of Egypts. I wonder if they've got a spare Sunday to give over to the Scottish Football Association. But certainly we now have another international game coming up. This weekend has been the international weekend in the break for the Premier League. Although we've had the Tunnocks Tea Cake Caramel Wafer, whatever it is, Cup, which is the old B&Q Centenary Cup in old money for the lower leagues, and it looks, I think, probably Partick Thistle and Inverness Cali would be a decent final for that. They've got through. There's another game coming on Tuesday night. Rangers Colts are playing Wrexham, who put out Ayr United in the last round. So lots of things happening, interesting things happen. I really like the cup. I think it's like the old Texaco Cup plus. Those who are old enough to remember, the Texaco Cup was the cross-border Scotland-England competition, a bit like the Inter-Toto before the Inter-Toto. But now we have Tunnocks and tea cakes and caramel wafers in the cup for Scottish clubs, with some Welsh, some Irish and some English clubs involved, which is great. Interesting. Brings a little difference to the whole kind of scenario. And interesting, it was Connacht Keys, whatever their name is, the Welsh team, Partick Thistle put out yesterday, who put out Kilmarnock in the European Cups. So, writing this week for Ringside Report, I wrote about Jane Couch. For those who don't know who Jane Couch is, a fantastic woman and human being. She's suffering at the moment just now because she was the first female boxer to professionally box in the United Kingdom, and to do so she had to take on the British Boxing Board of Control. They argued that women were unstable to box because they menstruated, and I will leave you with what the decision was. The unfortunate thing for Jane was that 5 times world champion, absolutely superb ambassador for the sport, looked after by individual boxers better than those who were in charge of boxing, and better than those who were promoters or the media or anybody. She was seen as a freak. But her suffering is mental, and that it really took a massive amount out of her. There was, I think, her first world title, she broke a jaw, fractured an eye socket, fractured ribs, bruised, battered, but it was nothing to what was done inside of her when her own country, the United Kingdom, wouldn't allow her to pursue her own trade, which was as a professional boxer. She cleared £200 after her first world title, in comparison to the riches the likes of Jessica McCaskill would have been on last night in her world title fight, her unification battle that she won. The contrast is just unbelievable. But if it wasn't for Jane Couch, as Nicola Adams said when she won her gold in London, then there wouldn't be women's boxing in the United Kingdom. Couch was a hero abroad, but ignored at home. And she's now an MBE, and her autobiography is out. A tremendous tale, and also quite embarrassing for the British. It's also been embarrassing this week because of the British and Irish Boxing Association's authority, granting a licence to Nigel Benn, not because of the fact that they have given a 55-year-old the opportunity to go back in the ring, that they've packed the undercard. You can see Lee McAllister, the assassin from Aberdeen, and also Scott Harrison coming back after 3 and a bit years on the undercard, which creates a little bit more interest. But as I muse in my Talking Buzz column this week, the British and Irish Boxing Authority, in the last few programmes that they've put up, the last few cards they've promoted, they haven't covered themselves in glory in terms of having competitive fights. And indeed there was a litany of fights last week, which included boxers being arrested at the airport, journeymen winning who shouldn't have, and last minute fighters coming in to take on the people who had prepared and beaten them. There have been a number of things over the last few BIBA programmes which I have raised. We'll see what comes of this one, and this massive one in Birmingham in November with Nigel Benn. I also previewed the Warrington and Usyk fights. I'm not necessarily going to tell you who won the Usyk fight. It was a very interesting one. I've still to watch it back, but I've read a lot of the comments. The Warrington one, however, second round stoppage. What a fantastic fight Warrington put up. Now, unification. Please, 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 please. I have to say, BT Sport and the Queensberry Promotions who put the card together better than before. Some really good fights on there. And Jordan McCorry, unfortunately, couldn't do to Zelfa Barrett what Ronnie the Shark Clark had done and beat him. But a great ambassador to the sport is Jordan McCorry from Scotland, and Barrett well deserved winning his Commonwealth title. What he can go on to do, British level certainly, European perhaps, world, not so sure. I think you should be very careful as to who it is that we're promoting on to start at that level. Usyk certainly looked at that level already, and as I mused in my column, George Grove suggesting that Usyk is the best heavyweight on the planet without ever having donned clubs in a heavyweight contest shows a lot. And the ridicule continues with the KSI Logan Paul fight, but also Tyson Fury in WWE. I'm going to leave it there. I've been back out reviewing this week for the Stornoway Way with Dogstar, and also with National Theatre Scotland with The Drift. Both I went to and they didn't have tickets for me, which was a bit disappointing, but I am of that age and I don't look as though I'm going to sponge off them. Don't know how. Sometimes I look as though I've fallen out the street. But managed to get tickets and get in. My major gripe is the Courtier Theatre in Glasgow. It's a wedding venue. It's not a theatre anymore. Sightlines were terrible. The acoustics were not good. The place struggled. People within the audience left. There were 50 people left at the interval. Not so good. The Drift I really loved, and it's a shout out, I suppose, to Jenny Lindsay, daughter of Anne Lindsay, former colleague of mine at Ayr College, who's been doing Flint and Pitch, spoken word poetry in Scotland for some time, and The Drift had been one of the things that she had been championing, and she was in at the very beginning of, and well worth it was. Hannah Lavery talking us through racism in Scotland in a very uncomfortable manner, because she experienced it, and it reminded me, and I wrote this in the review, I tutor young children who are Muslim, who are Hindi, who are Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Sikh, Indian, and they have racism in our country every single day, and it annoys me that people dismiss their experience and they go on about them in no-go areas. There have been no-go areas for people in Scotland as long as I've been living. They just happen to be white, run by gangs, and particularly dangerous. And in particularly in Glasgow, because that's where gang culture and knife crime was at its most prevalent during the 90s. But nobody talked about colour the people were who perpetuated. Stornoway Way, alcoholic from Stornoway, coming over to record an album. A beautiful book, translated from the novel into a play by the man who wrote the book, by the author. But didn't translate quite as well as it perhaps ought to. The Drift autobiographical solo show. Both worth it in their own ways to go and see. And I end with a little bit of a rant. You see, because I do a lot of driving around, I listen to a lot of podcasts, BBC iPlayer for radio is gone. Didn't tell us when it was going, it suddenly went. BBC Sounds appears. Now all the downloads I had from BBC iPlayer are gone, so I have to go and do it through BBC Sounds. The app is worse. It's really difficult to work out which ones of the radio programmes that I follow I have got the downloads for and which I don't have. Although BBC 4 Extra have replaced back again the 6 o'clock in the morning broadcast with, they had taken it away from the crime dramas that I watched, I listened to, and they replaced it with other stuff, which is their right to so do, but they've replaced it back. So I've been listening to Whimsy, and I have been listening to Carlton Hobbs as Sherlock Holmes, and what a fantastic thing to wake up to in the morning. So as we look out on a bleak and dreary day for Sunday, the 13th of October, Japan, Scotland later on, currently in the Grand Prix. It's exciting, but Hamilton's not doing so well. And hopefully by the end of the day, that's something we will not be able to say about Scotland, and they will be in the next stage of the Rugby World Cup. But till next week, bye for now.